All right, it's 6:30. We will get underway. Welcome. You have arrived to the Mississauga Official Plan Review Community Meeting. And tonight we're talking about how we can increase housing choices in our neighborhoods. My name is Ruth Marland. I'm the Manager of Community Relations in Planning and Building, and I'll be your facilitator tonight. If you could remember to remain on mute, we will have an opportunity for you to contribute questions and comments, but remaining on mute until then would be really appreciated. I'd like to start our meeting by acknowledging that today we gather virtually on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wyandot, and Huron people. We also acknowledge the many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and other global Indigenous people who call Mississauga home. We welcome everyone. And tonight, we're very happy that we've got Councillor Parrish from Ward 5 joining us. Councillor Parrish, you could give a wave, thank you. And we also have Councillor George Carlson from Ward 11. And he is also online. And Councillor Carlson, if you'd like to give a wave. We have a big Mississauga team tonight that has been working very hard on this study. So I'd like to introduce them to you. Jason Bevan, our Director of City Planning Strategies, is online. Jason, if you could give a wave. And we have Paulina Mikakic, who's the Director of Planning Innovation and the manager responsible for the study. Elizabeth Bang is the planner and project lead. And Brandon Williams is the planner also on the team. And tonight we have breakout rooms. So in our breakout rooms, you will meet these facilitators: Amy Campbell, Francisco Cordiero, Mojan Jamfar, Rojan Mohammadi, Anna Malikian, Amina Menkad, Melissa Slupek. And in addition tonight, we have a graphic illustrator who's recording the conversations that we will all hear tonight. Her name is Tanya Gerber. Tanya, could you please give a wave? Thank you. And our meeting producer tonight is Jasmine Chandy. So Jasmine, could you please share the agenda slide? So as mentioned, we've got a workshop format for you tonight. We'll start with the presentation, followed by breakout room discussions where we hope to hear from you as we explore different ways of increasing housing choices in our neighborhoods. And then after the breakout rooms, we will come back together to share key messages from each group, all within 90 minutes. And given that we have quite a number registered for tonight, we would like to offer that staff would stay online beyond 8 o'clock for another 30 minutes so that you have the opportunity to hear from Tanya how she's captured all the comments that have been made through her graphic illustrations, and also an opportunity that should we not get to your questions during the first 90 minutes, then we've got an additional 30 where we'd be happy to take questions and comments. So tonight we have a closed captioning feature that we will turn on. Jasmine, if you could turn this on, please. So that WebEx voice just let you know that in the bottom left-hand corner, you have a blue icon, and that's the closed captioning icon. So if you would like closed captioning, you can press that icon and it will activate your closed captioning for your screen. Next slide, please. So during the meeting, we want to hear from many of you. So a variety of ways to do that. If you've logged in through your computer, you may use the chat box to, or if you're on your mobile phone, you can use the chat box as well to type your comments or questions. And if you have questions, we really would appreciate if you could start those questions with 3 question marks. That enables us to know a visual cue that we've got a question coming. If you are on your mobile phone and your computer using WebEx, you can raise your hand to speak by activating the raise hand feature to the right of your name. And if you've called in on your phone, you won't have access to chat, but you can raise your hand by pressing *3 and then *6 to unmute yourself to speak. Next slide, please. So this is just a little roadmap to where all these tools are on your screen. So bottom left hand icon for closed captioning, your mute and camera are in the center, and the chat box you can open on the bottom right hand. And then in the participants list, you can activate the raise hand feature to the right of your name. So that's a quick overview. And the beauty of putting your comments and questions into chat is that becomes a transcript for us. So when we're doing our meeting summary, we have great documentation to make sure that we've got a good record of all this valuable input. So thank you for your participation. Next slide. And you have a way to toggle how you would like to view the inputs on your screen. So the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can change the view from a grid view where you have everybody's faces and Hollywood squares, or if you'd like to have the speaker have the primary screen, you can toggle accordingly. And next slide, please. Again, given our great numbers tonight, which we're so happy that you're able to join us, we would like to thank you for contributing actively and being mindful of others, making sure that you're being as succinct as possible so that we can hear from as many voices as possible, just to make sure that we are sharing the time tonight. So thank you. Next slide. All right, so this is a great opportunity for us to find out who is in the room, and it helps staff tailor messages and questions. So if you wouldn't mind clicking to the poll questions on the right side of your screen, whether you are a Mississauga resident, a Mississauga business owner, agency or region staff, land developer or consultant, a community group representative, or other. That would be wonderful. And we have a second poll question. We're really interested to know what best describes your interest in more housing choices. And we have a number of these choices. If you could have a look and see what works or what applies best to you. Are you a property owner looking for options on your property? Are you a property owner looking for options for your family to live on your property? Are you interested in living in a garden suite, coach house, basement apartment? Or are you interested in improving the affordability and supply of housing in Mississauga? Or an interested resident concerned about more housing in your neighborhood? Or an interested resident looking for a smaller home in your neighborhood? Or an industry professional or other? So we'll close the poll in about 30 seconds. It would be great if you could indicate which of those categories apply best to you. And just a note that staff are communicating behind the scenes through a variety of devices, and I will be referring to my phone just to make sure we're logistically on time and have all our activities coordinated. Okay, so we're going to close the poll and we'll see the results shortly. And we've got an indication of who's in the room. So the majority are Mississauga residents, And we've got a few in the other category and some staff and business representatives. So a good diversity. And with respect to what best describes your interest, it looks like most are interested in improving the affordability and supply of housing in Mississauga. And the other is in industry professionals. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. All right, so now we're ready to move into the presentation, and Liz Bang is going to set the stage for us. Over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Ruth, and good evening, everyone. So thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. I know housing sometimes is a pretty big topic, so thanks for taking your Wednesday evening for this. So just to start, I just wanted to provide a bit of a background. So the topic tonight, housing, is in the context of what we're currently doing as an official plan review. So for some of you who aren't familiar with what that is, an official plan is typically a key land use planning document within a city, and it guides the growth and the planning of the municipality. So within Mississauga, we have our 2012 official plan, and planning legislation tells us every 10 years we have to take that plan and we have to update it. So right now, we're currently in the middle of that update, and we're looking to complete that by next year. So as part of doing that, typically in an official plan review, we'll look at two specific things. The first being we have to make sure in that update that our policies are conforming to any provincial or regional policies and legislation. And the second thing we want to do is ensure that our new official plan is aligning with any new master plans, action plans, or strategic plans that have happened since 2012. So when we started this update last year, we identified 5 key themes. So those are the key themes that you see right in front of you, and I'll just read them out just for the benefit of those on the phone. So the first being city structure and urban design, the second one, housing, third, transportation, fourth, environment and climate change, and then the fifth one being community infrastructure and jobs. And then as we were going through our update, we did hold a series of engagements late last year where we asked within these policy themes, what are some of the policy priorities that we have to consider? And so those are some of the main key questions that we've had to ask ourselves throughout this official plan update. But for tonight, the main question we'll be asking you is how can we increase housing choices within our neighborhoods? So next slide, please. So when we say increasing housing choices, you know, it's a pretty big term, and oftentimes people wonder, well, why is that important? So I just wanted to take a minute to explain. So really the main goal of increasing housing choices is to expand the types of low-rise housing forms and tenures that's offered within the city. So typically when we're thinking about housing, we're thinking of 3 different types of forms. So it could be low, medium, or high-rise. So for tonight, our focus is on looking at how can we expand the low-rise housing forms that we're offering within the city. So in order to do that, it really requires the city to re-examine a lot of the planning permissions we have within our residential neighborhoods. And part of the reason why we're doing that is a bit more legislative based. So we had, you know, a lot of provincial policies come out within the last 2 to 3 years that recognized a lot of the housing challenges we've been seeing. So whether it was related to the supply or the nature of that supply, so, you know, the diversity of that stock. But then more than that, we've been hearing a lot of housing stories where, you know, a lot of people have experienced few housing choices within the city that might fit their different life stages, income levels, accessibility needs, and even their workforce needs. So keeping that in mind, you know, we started this project back in April to re-examine a lot of the low-rise housing form within the city. So I think many of you are curious, you know, well, what does that mean and what form could that take? So I'll just explain within the next slide. So within the provincial legislation, they did require municipalities to take a lot of these different housing types and housing arrangements and implement them within their cities. So knowing that the city actually has broad authority to determine how it's going to implement these different housing forms and where and when. So with that, I always love this graphic because it tells you it's a really good snapshot of the different housing forms we'll be discussing tonight and what we want to get your feedback on. So I'll just explain briefly. With these housing forms, they're typically in two bigger buckets. So there's either housing types or housing arrangements. Under the housing type umbrella, we typically have a subcategory called additional residential units. And that's where you see an additional unit being added to an existing lot. So it could come in the form of a coach house or a garden suite, which, from the outside and structurally is the same. It's just a coach house is permanent, whereas a garden suite is temporary. And then under the same subcategory of additional residential units, we're being asked to consider implementing laneway suites. And some of you might have heard a lot of that work being done within Toronto right now or Hamilton. And so that's a type of housing form that we'll be exploring within Mississauga to see if it's feasible. And then the last additional residential unit form within that little subcategory are garage conversions. So that's where a garage that's either, attached to a house or detached from a house is converted to a residential living space, potentially because it was underutilized. So in the same housing type bucket, we have what we call plexes. So some of you might be familiar with this if you've, looked around Mississauga. They're really apparent within some of the Lakeview, Port Credit, and the Cawthra Road areas. But the plexes can come in a duplex form, which has 2 units, triplex, which has 3 units, and then multiplexes, which has 4 or more units, but still retains that low-rise structure. The way that I love to explain these plexes is, for the most part, when you're looking at them from the outside, like in that picture on the right hand. Sorry? Oh, so maybe just a quick reminder to mute yourselves. Thank you. So as I was explaining with the plexes, from the outside, what's really great about them is, for the most part, they retain a single detached form, but on the outside is where you'll start to see the 2 or 3 or 4 or more units. And then the last bucket that we're looking at are housing arrangements. So that's where, similar to the plexes, on the outside, it retains a single, semi, or townhouse form, but on the inside, the arrangement is changing. So 2 quick examples are co-ownership housing as a type of housing arrangement. So that's where 2 or 3 or more people that are unrelated or related to each other might decide to buy a home together. That's something that, we've seen a lot within the news, where 2 or 3 elderly people who have been best friends for a very long time decide they want to age together and they want to age in place, so they'll go ahead and buy a house together. And then the second example in the housing arrangements I always love to explain is something called home share. So that's where it's currently being implemented in Toronto, and there has been some implementation within McMaster Hamilton area. So that's where an elderly person might have an extra bedroom, and they'll decide to rent it to either a student or a younger worker in exchange for reduced rent. That younger worker or student will help with household chores or to provide companionship. So one thing I like to explain is, that was a lot to go through. But if after this you want to check out our project website, we do have fact sheets on each of these housing types and arrangements for you. Can I have the next slide, please? So back in the late summer to fall, as part of the broader official plan review, we did have some engagements on housing. And so I love to throw up this slide because, they're things we heard a lot about in either the chat function or verbally as we were answering, questions from the community. And one thing that we noticed about them that I always love to share are some common themes. So what we noticed was that there was a need for more, affordable housing options with different housing types for all income levels. But moreover, there was a need to support a variety of housing arrangements. So, those housing arrangements being some of which I explained in the previous slide. And then the last thing that kind of really came clear in those engagements was we heard young people were most affected by the lack of affordable housing and choices. So based on that, if I could have the next slide, please. We followed up with a survey earlier this June. And something I'll just mention is, although I'm presenting some of those survey results tonight, it is an ongoing survey. So if after this you realize that you didn't see a survey and you just need help navigating to it, just let one of us know and we'll get you connected to it. But it is an ongoing survey until the end of the summer. And the purpose of that survey was really to get an understanding of what your current housing needs were. How could you see some of these different housing options fit within our neighborhoods? And what could some of your housing needs be within a 10-year time? So just quickly, what we saw so far is that 2 out of the 3 respondents felt that, their current housing situation was either not meeting their needs or they were meeting them, but there needed to be some type of improvement. So we saw a lot about some improvements for accessibility reasons, or some improvements in terms of small expansions to just help a growing family live within the space. And then when we asked respondents in 10 years, what do you think your housing needs will be? We were happy to see that nearly 70% preferred to stay in Mississauga. So whether that was staying in their current home within Mississauga, moving to a smaller home, either in their same neighborhood or a different neighborhood, or moving to a bigger home in another Mississauga neighborhood. So that tells us a lot about potential for all of these different housing options that we're looking at to be able to help people stay within the city. And that's something that we really want to hear from you today. How could we make those housing options more available within our city so that it fits within the feel of our neighborhoods? Can I have the next slide, please? In addition, on the survey, what we wanted to get was a sense of, again, what respondents preferred when we looked at all these housing forms. So we asked, between these 2 pictures, and they each have 2 units in them, which would you prefer? So either one, the picture on the left, where there's a garden suite in the back, which is 1 unit, and the main home in the front, which is the 2nd unit, or the picture on the right, which is a duplex, and it would have 2 units inside stacked on top of each other. And most respondents currently picked the garden suite or the coach house arrangement. Can I have the next slide, please? And then we followed up with asking, if you had to pick between a bigger garden suite or a coach house, or a smaller garden suite or a coach house within Mississauga or your neighborhood, which would you prefer? And most respondents preferred a bigger garden suite or coach house. Can I have the next slide, please? And then one of the questions we asked was around garage conversion. So remember, this is where a garage that might be underutilized is taken and converted to a residential unit. And what we found was between, a garage that's converted, that's attached to the home or detached to the home, most respondents overwhelmingly picked the garage that's not attached to the home is what they would like to see within their neighborhood. Can I have the next slide, please? And then the last question we asked on the survey was really just to get a sense of how we can see some of these different housing forms being implemented within our current neighborhood. So on the left, you'll see just from the top view, a current neighborhood that has 10 lots, 10 units. But as part of the goal of this project to provide more increasing housing choices, we asked if 10 more units were added, where should they go? And so the choices were on the right, where we offered basement apartment, duplexes, triplexes, or multiplexes, or should that be done through garage conversions, garden suites, or coach houses? And respondents could pick more than one if they found, something was a desirable option to be able to add 10 more units to the neighborhood. So for the most part, what we found was that people picked the plexes, the garage conversions, or the garden suites and coach houses. And when we asked why, most of them cited that these housing forms had better access to sunlight. For the most part, they were a bit more accessible. You could access the street, the sidewalk, or the neighborhood a lot more easily. And that there was a higher chance that there would be privacy or that you could live a bit more independently from the main home. Next slide, please. So one thing that we wanted to do tonight, just following that same theme of, knowing that we have to increase our housing choices and implement those housing forms, there are a number of things that we have to balance. So for the most part, when we present this topic, a lot of people ask about parking, affordability, landscaping, trees, privacy, and that's exactly the things that we have to balance. So in the next few slides, there's going to be 4 polls, and we'll take you through them slowly, and they're going to be quick polls. And we want to ask you to choose the picture you prefer when providing more housing choice in our neighborhoods. So with that, we'll start with the first poll. And something that we want to ask you is, when we're providing these housing choices, what scale and height fits best within our neighborhood? And so we have 4 pictures on the slides. And with the first one is the choice A, is it 3 stories? B, it's 1 story but covers a larger area. C, 2 stories but covers a smaller area. Or D, from the outside, it retains a single detached form. And so what you should see now on your right is a quick poll that comes up. And then after we're done the quick poll, we're going to see the results immediately. So I think what I see here is, okay, so there are a lot of respondents who prefer, from the outside, we're retaining that single detached form and structure. And at the same time, I see, there's some considerations for 3 stories or 2 stories that cover a smaller area. So with the next quick poll, something we wanted to ask, that has to be considered when we're looking to provide more housing choice is, what entrance do we think best fits our neighborhoods? So is it A, a side entrance, B, an entrance at the front, C, a covered side entrance, so from things like rain or snow or any, weather elements, or D, 1 common entrance for each unit inside? So again, on your right, you should see a quick poll pop up.
Liz, there's been 2 questions about the neighborhood for these questions. So, which type of neighborhood was used as a template for this question? Could you qualify, please?
Sorry, what did you mean by that? What?
So the question is, which type of neighborhood was used as a template for this question? So in terms of the entranceway and also the previous question, which was about heights and scale.
So we actually looked across Mississauga for different, neighborhood feels and fit. So in terms of the scale, we already see that in some of our Mississauga neighborhoods. So we looked all around. In terms of the entrance, actually, interestingly enough, 3 out of the 4 pictures are from 3 different Mississauga neighborhoods. So we did consider all the different fit and feel of all the neighborhoods within the city. Oh, so I see here within the quick poll on the right, there's a tie between side entrances, entrance at the front, and then the covered side entrance. But then shortly after that was the 1 common entrance for each unit inside. So with the next quick poll, our focus is on parking. So something that's, an aspect that we really have to balance when we're looking at providing some of these housing options. So we're wondering from you, what parking do you think fits best within our neighborhoods? So is it A, where driveway parking is provided and it's shared between all, those who live within the home? B, a driveway that leads to a small parking area in the back for, again, all those who live within the home? Is it C, a shared driveway parking area and with some street parking? Or is it D, no parking is provided? So here I see that, okay, so the most, I guess, popular response is the shared driveway parking with some street parking considerations. And that was followed by, potentially a driveway that leads to a small parking area or driveway parking that is shared for all those living within the home. So with our last quick poll, we were curious what you thought about how important landscaping was when we provide these housing choices. So is it A, little landscaping and trees, B, some landscaping and trees, or C, a lot of landscaping and trees? So this is something, and I'll just expand a bit, it is something that we really are considering as we do this work. We have seen some municipalities who saw that within their communities was important to them, and then some municipalities where wasn't as emphasized, but that was because some of the community feedback they received. So for the most part, everyone here tonight saw, there is importance in having some landscaping and trees or a lot of landscaping and trees when we're providing these housing choices. So with that, something I will mention is that, if you know any other family or friends who live within Mississauga who would have some feedback on some of these quick polls, we are, after this event, providing a bit of a worksheet on our project engagement page. And you could always come back to that, fill in some of the quick poll answers, and then submit it to us. And that would, be feedback that we would consider. So with that, I'm just going to pass it off back to Ruth. And this is, I guess, the time, I've done a lot of talking in this presentation, and it's really the time where you might have some questions, and I'd be happy to answer them, or the broader team here.
So Liz, we're going to jump into the breakout room. So would you like to do the overview, please? Thank you, Josephine.
Sure. So with the remainder of our time, what we really want to do was with this project, whether it was the survey or the engagement we heard last fall, we got a lot of different housing stories from many different members of the community. And we got a lot of those housing stories in the context that, these different housing forms, the low-rise housing forms, could really help meet some of those needs. So the activity we want to do tonight is we have 7 avatars, or, there's 7 different households, people within our community that have a very different housing needs. And with those housing needs, what we want to ask you within these breakout rooms is, what type of low-rise housing option do you think could meet those needs? So they can either meet those needs today, within 5 years, or 10 years. That's something that we want your feedback on. And because we're really asking you to put yourself into another person's shoes. One thing I'll just mention before we get put into our breakout rooms is that these avatars or household stories that we're putting together are really ongoing. This is our first cut of it, but it was really our first stab at understanding the diversity of our community, and therefore their diverse housing needs and their living preferences.